Hello and welcome back to another episode of our Mega-lo-Mania in Unreal Engine. So over the weekend, last stream I think was Thursday or Friday. So over the weekend I did some more work on the research area specifically, and I think for the most part I did make some pretty significant changes in that area. Um, Changed kind of the core structures, um, updated the data. I think I did that as well. I'm not sure if I did that on the last stream or not actually. But we've got now, if we look at our recipes, we have all of the recipes, or a significant number of recipes for each of the different technologies: offensive, defensive, and the repairs. And we actually ended up with 985 of them, and the current implementation that I was working with basically wouldn't have worked with that amount of recipes, and I didn't appreciate how many there'd be. And the basics of the previous implementation was that it would have to check each technology against all of those recipes to find the applicable ones pretty much every kind of frame of the game within the UI, which obviously is quite significant if you can have at most 12 technologies, and obviously that would be multiplied again by how many sectors the map has. So needed to make some improvements there. So I added a couple of new structures. We used to use the player research, but now we've got. I'm not sure that I use the blueprint just yet, but we definitely have the design. This represents the research project, I suppose. Is that? I forget now. What? I don't think that's true. No, because the design represents the available designs that the player can research, and they're created, initialized at the beginning of the sector's life as such, beginning of the castle even. And the available flag will change whether the player is able to research it or not. The design project represents the actual project the player is researching, or probably more specifically the castle is researching, because it could be any of the players. And the blueprint's going to represent the effective completed research. So the technology in which the player can actually use. I haven't quite completed that side of things. Now inside the castle, most of the changes were applied. I think there was perhaps a small number of them with regards to the player controller itself, but that was mainly just changing the data type, although we do have the begin design project part. So mostly within the castle we have quite a lot of methods within the research section. A lot of them aren't actually used anymore. They're the old ones, and I have to kind of go through them and clean them up, and get rid of the associated variables that they're using. So the key ones would be the initialized designs. This one takes all of the technology from the technologies data table, and it creates all the designs effectively. So it creates makes this design structure with all the properties set. Obviously available is unselected by default. Adds them up. So that's all effectively that's just simply the designs between the starting epoch and the ending epoch of that particular, or this particular island. And then the next one is initialize recipes, and this one is taking all of the available designs and finding all of the recipes that not only apply to those technologies but also apply to the sector itself, using this has resources check. So this has resources check basically says, given this set of resources from our recipe, do we have them available, and whether the check quantity is checked, that basically as name implies checks whether you've actually got the resources, when it's unchecked, when it's false, it just checks that you can have by dint of the sector having those resources available. And then it adds all these recipes to this map. Now, obviously, the map isn't replicated because maps cannot be replicated. I actually accidentally replicated one in the recipes originally, and it caused a random crash that took quite a little bit of time to figure out what it was, because I didn't even realise that that was what would happen. So yeah, replicating maps, not a good idea. But because we can't replicate the recipes, that's why the design structure has that available check in it. And then we have the I believe it's the update available designs. So this function goes through the designs, and basically it just updates that availability boolean value. So it's set bool by reference, which is taking that availability. It does some output if it's changed that value, either it's become true or false from what it was originally. But that availability boolean is what the UI uses to determine whether something should or shouldn't be shown. So the UI doesn't actually need the recipes anymore. They're just relying on that boolean check, which is kind of good for the UI tick. And because our recipes are so narrowed down to the technologies on this sector, not just the technologies as a whole, we don't have that many recipes to check, and therefore we're not wasting a lot of time going through hundreds of recipes on every sector. So we can just run this now, and we can see we've got a little bit of output there briefly for a second that says we have 12 designs. That makes sense because we're always going to have 12 designs, except perhaps the later epochs. I think even then they just don't knock off the early text. You've always got 12 designs. And 29 recipes. So there's only 29 different ways in which all of these things can be created, given the resources available on this particular island. Or this particular sector, sorry, of this particular island. So we can select the research, and we can actually perform the research project. And one thing that is different that I did realise that I'd kind of done wrong was that if that one doesn't have any time, do this one instead. Oh, apparently I can't change it when it's in progress. But the research doesn't continue from where it left off. So if we begin this and we let it tick round to probably about the halfway mark of this cycle, and then we go select it again. It doesn't seem like I can change the research, but I can reselect it, and we start it again. It starts from scratch. So I was mistaken in the fact that a research would maintain that progress. It always starts from scratch. It must have just been misreading the numbers or something like that. So but that makes it a lot easier. We don't need to now remember how much progress we've made on individual technologies. We just always start from scratch. So within the UI research panel, so a lot of this is fairly similar to what it was, except kind of the handling of the designs, which is done update design widget here. This is much simpler. I've just added some comments to define it because there's just a finite set of rules now. We just simply have whether it's available or not. And what I've planned to do and have done to a certain extent is that the designs will actually be removed from the design list on the sector once they've been researched. They'll become blueprints. So we just have to say, unfortunately, we have to iterate over all the designs and either add or remove the widget based on its availability check. But we also have to iterate through the actual technologies themselves and make sure that an available technology exists for them. So to make things a little bit easier, when we iterate over the designs, we build up this little list of available technologies, and then we use that in the other part of the function to actually determine whether we should keep the widget or remove it. But as I say, that's fairly straightforward now. There's no kind of complicated logic. There's certainly no recipe checking. It's just all down to that Boolean value. So it makes the UI much cleaner and simpler. Even if I were able to share a function to do the recipe checking, which is what I intended to do the first time round, this is just still much easier. And I think that the main difference in this case is when a research is begun. That's on the research widget. Where is event graph? It's this one here. When we click on a research, we simply call the begin design project. Now that just proxies it from the player controller onto the castle, and then the castle should stop the current research, find the design we want to do a couple of sanity checks on that, make sure it's available, make sure that we've got the library if we need it. Obviously that's not complete, but none of them require the library, so that's sorry, the laboratory, not the library. So they're okay. Then we find a recipe and we create this design project, and that's all we do here. And the way that appears on the UI is because the UI is checking to see whether the castle has a design project, and if it does, it'll use it. So we'll have to just debug why when I try and change the design project it does not work. So the technologies now appear as resources become available for them. So they are using their recipes in there. It's basically a check to say, do you have any recipes and the resources for those recipes to create these technologies. So this list that we have now is the recipes, all the recipes that can be used for the resources this sector has. So now I've clicked on the sling technology. We stop the current design project. That's fairly straightforward. That just removes the designers from the current design project, puts them back into the population pool, and resets the design project. So there shouldn't be any problem there. We find a design, which we should be able to do with the sling. Do a couple of checks, find the recipe for the technology, again should be fine with that, and set the design project. So now if I check the stone instead, well, rock in this case, we should stop the design project. Now we obviously don't have any designers, so there's nothing going to change here. Out, over. So that's true, that's okay. That should be true as well. Bit difficult to see within all this, but it does look that the lab says it's false, the availability says that it's true. So it's definitely, it's lab and its availability is correct. See if we can find a research for recipe for it. So we found index 1, therefore the result is true. So now we should be able to set the design project. Unfortunately that kind of for some reason goes off screen, but the current design project and say for some reason that's showing up on the other monitor, but and it's not wrapping properly either, so I can't be confident that it's actually set correctly. Where are we? None of the information is showing correctly, but obviously it doesn't update here. So design should be replicated. Let's just check. So this is all done within the research task. The research task is looking at the design project explicitly. Okay, so according to this, it is doing the rock design. So that's actually correct. And the time that it says that it's got is relevant to the rock design. So I think what probably is the case is that it's simply just the widget not updating properly. It's like it gets the image only when it's constructed, and when the player changes the research, there's probably no point in which it gets reconstructed. So just going to see what happens in this case. Oh, that won't work, will it? So I need to set it once. Okay, so we'll say so I just want to say only continue, only do fine design, only go do the rest of this if the current research project's name is none. That should allow us to select the first one, but it should prevent us from selecting another. Now obviously that kind of replicates the same buggy behavior we had before, but the main thing is now I know that that's not happening. We can put a breakpoint here just to be certain, but now I know equals 0. Okay, so yes, that does make sense actually. I forgot. In here, we set it to none, so that's okay. Can't think of an easy way to basically stop it going through it twice. Okay, let's address it slightly differently. In here, we have the ability to click on a different item. And then we use the design project here. So that it says if the design project's name is not equal to none, and we don't have a research widget, then we create one. If it is equal to none, then we go down here. It checks that the research widget is valid, and if it's valid, it removes it and then clears it. Now, I think what's happening is that the replication of the non-value, the clearing of it, is just being ignored because we set it again so quickly. This is the castle, isn't it? One thing that's probably a little bit brute force in it is that I can clear it when I click on a different item, but I think that might make it kind of, I guess the UI will flicker. Let's find out. Make sure that when I don't have anything it still works. So wait, the rock should appear soon. There we go. Okay, so again, that's a replication issue, isn't it? It's almost like the widget is behind in terms of kind of the data that we've got. Okay, very simple way is to remember the name of the technology we are working on. So when we create this widget, maybe immediately afterwards, set the current design. And maybe we can just get away with that. Let's see. To do that too. So if we do clear the widget, then we set the current design to none. If we don't clear the widget, we set it to whatever we're doing. Might work. Not quite sure why it defaulted to bazooka. Okay, that seems to have randomly made it worse. I guess we do need to do that. So and that just needs to be not equals. So effectively, if it's changed and it's not none, then we go across the top line, which recreates the widget. Although we don't clear it in this case either. We need 2 branches, don't we, to get this right. If it's not equal to none, if it is equal to none, we go and clear it. If it's changed, so if it's the same, don't do anything. If it's changed, don't think we need that check anymore, do we? That's where I'm kind of a bit confused, because that one's no longer required. Let's see if that works. Easiest way to figure out what it is. So at the moment it's none. That's correct. Now it's a sling. So it is saying sling. But we're blocked here again. So what's the deal here? Okay, so the current value is none. I think actually that should be 12 gone wrong. Stop. If it's different, that's what I was missing. Yep, so we should be able to change it as soon as the next thing becomes available. Yeah. We broke it. So last time it did that is because it removed it twice, effectively. So it should be okay because we don't have so we remove it. Yeah, we've gone completely the wrong place. Trying to figure out what's going wrong with this. This should be fairly straightforward, but something is causing it to get in a bit of a mess. See what we've got there. So it's currently saying we've got no research, that's fine. Now we're doing the sling, that's also true. Now we should be doing the rock. We go down the set path, so we come over here, and by then we've removed too much. Oh. That's what. Remove from parent defaults to self. Obviously. I think that was it. So we've gone down the set path. We get a rock. We go down the set path. We've changed. We should have all of our people as well. That one person that I used on the other one should have came back. Even though we didn't quite get there. We go to the reset branch. So yes, I think that's got it now. So we don't need that one. We don't need that. And these prints on the end. Put that in place. It might be nice if we didn't have to do that all twice. Or that part twice. But I don't know how to get rid of it right now. I think that'll be fine though. I think that'll be fine. So we've got the rock. We go down the set path. We change. We should have all of our people as well. That one person that I used on the other one should have came back. Even though we didn't quite get there. We go to the reset branch. So yes, I think that's got it now. So we don't need that one. We don't need that. And these prints on the end. Obviously. remove it if we've got it, but we're going to recreate it anyway, so we set it anyway. We just add it to the panel. Okay, so that should be it without the trace, or without the console output. Yep, okay, good. So we solved that problem. Bit tedious, but we got there in the end. Can change research now. Okay, so when a research project has been started, if we go back to the castle, we provide it with a recipe index. Now that's the index for the recipe data table or the recipe map in the server that we can use to make it. And we store that because that's the recipe that basically allowed that technology to become available. So we store it against the design. What we want to be able to do is see what those are and see that we've got all the right bits and pieces in place for them. And they're visible through the blueprint screen, which we will work on now. Just get that up to provide an example, but the blueprint screen is fairly straightforward. So we're going to start off with a blueprint class, which is a panel. And this will be our blueprint panel. The blueprint panel basically just displays all of the research that has been done. We want to make it look like the research panel for a lot of the way. I think it looks a lot like that. Just try and get into the game so I can be sure. Probably have a screenshot of it somewhere as well, but to do some research to make it available. So the game currently shows that we've got all of those available to us. Obviously, if you remember from mine, I don't get those. So there is some difference between the recipes within the current game that I've got access to here, the recipes that I've obviously got hold of here and are using. Obviously some display issues, but I haven't gone through and kind of perfected the display yet. It's a bit too thin, I think, perhaps. But the other two, Shield 3 and I think it's the bow and arrow, don't turn up. And I've definitely got enough resources in these two to be able to make any of the recipes. So I need to figure out what recipes it thinks that I should have for those and kind of find out why I don't have them. We're going to make the rock. Actually, we'll make something else. We'll do the spear. I think that's what that one is. Yeah. So I don't think I have the time for the spear. Nope. So the time is 50. And the pike is 200. I'll just drop those in. pretty long. I'll update them. I'll update all of them on the Google Sheet at some point so that I can import them correctly. It'd just be good to get those few in there. I'm gonna think that that one probably will be same time, and the bow and arrow. Okay, so let's just get that rock done. Now in the root screen we'll have this blue blueprint icon, and yeah, it lays out very much like the research. So we just pause it so we don't end up dying or losing. So I'm going to take a lot of what we have here. Oh, not that one. The research panel. From the horizontal box. Oh no. Need a canvas panel. Then the horizontal box. So the canvas panel should be, I don't think there's anything special about that, except it should be hit test invisible, which I think that it will be. Yep. So the header container can completely go, because we don't actually show any research anyway, and the icon just needs to be updated to our blueprint title icon. The three vertical boxes and the respective containers are all valid, because that's kind of how we want to display stuff. And over here we have the header image. So I think we just want to make sure the header image is a variable, and put that code in there. So it means we can exit the panel as required. So we need the icon on the root as well, just so we can go into it. Let's get the basic navigation part tied up. So again, since we're just kind of having simple, quick icons, add another icon. Not quite sure that I had it. Oh, no, got it. So most of this should be in place, or easy to tie up really. That goes into the layout. That should be the panel set up now. Yep. Now obviously in the, can't exit. Why can't we exit? Ah, forgot to do the binding here. not actually much better doing that, is it? It's almost better than the way it was. Okay, so navigation should be done. Go in and out. Yep. So now we have to create our blueprint, blueprint object. So we have designs, we have recipes, and when a research is completed, we call complete design project. And we remove from the designs array the design index that we have completed. We say research completed, we do the notification, but what we don't do is create that blueprint. So we're going to have hopefully it's not going to mess things up having blueprints within blueprints, but we'll soon find out. Okay, so that's definitely mine, even though it's got a nice blueprint icon. That's okay. So it means we're going to have to get the blueprint from the array first. We can just get a reference, I think, before we remove it. This is obviously going to be an array of blueprints, and we need to replicate it to the owner. So move that over. So we're going to add to it first. And we're going to make a new blueprint to add. That one in there so we don't have that long line. Okay, so that resets the design project straight away. That may not quite be what we want, because a design project does hold the recipe, but we probably don't want this recipe anyway, because this recipe may no longer be valid. Needed that. Oh well. So we need the find recipe for technology call. Straighten all these up. So we find the recipe for the technology. Now, one scenario that I can see here is that potentially we won't find a recipe index. I don't suppose it matters at this point, so we're just going to go with it anyway. But that recipe index could be none. Just need to pull these back. The technology name there. So the blueprint needs a category because obviously we are going to display it, and it needs a display name, so we'll make those changes. 2 new variables. It's also going to need the 2 images, I think. So one is the blueprint sprite that we use on the blueprint screen. The other one is just, we're going to call it the technology sprite. And that will be the one that's displayed either on the combat, defense, or repair area. So it can be one of 3 different sprites really, depending on the category. Okay, so we remember the technology here, so there's no reason to do that part of it. Because the name we have. What we do need though is to use this name to get the data table row for the technology. Because that's going to have everything we need in it. We'll move all this up a bit once we've got it right. Technology can go in there as well. And it can go in there. So the display name we've got, the category we've got, but we'll need to switch on that. Running out of room here, move that over quite a bit. So we need to switch on the category because we need to determine which of the sprites to use. Maybe we want select instead. I don't know where the shields are. Back to our data table. So I thought I had 3 sprites for them, but obviously they don't. Shields have a blueprint and they have an offensive sprite. So everything's got an offensive sprite. Some things have a factory sprite. Can't really remember what the info. Oh, the info is for the minimap. Yes. Okay, I remember now. So our blueprint does need a. So we've got the blueprint sprite, the sprite used for the blueprint, the technology sprite, the sprite used for the offensive, defensive, repair screens. We need the factory sprite. And we have the information sprite. So So quite a few little sprites there, but it saves us having to look them up later on anyway. So we don't need that. The blueprint is the information. Factory is that. Sorry, blueprint is information. Laboratory sprite. Yep, and factory, and offensive. Technology. So it should be lab, info, factory, offensive. We'll keep the order the same. We won't have to crisscross them all. Tech, factory, info. Info, factory, offensive. Keep getting this one way around. Info, factory, technology. There we go, much better. So now our blueprint's got all the properties it needs. We don't need that one actually. Bring that one a lot closer. So we add it to the blueprints array, we remove it from the designs array, we notify the player controller, and we just say research complete. And research panel will update itself because the research design is no longer available, so it's gone. Now we need the blueprint panel again. Close this one by accident. So we need the technology widget map variable in our blueprint panel. So we might be able to rename the previous one. Map widget. Forget what we mapped it to in this case. Literally just the widget type. That one. So should be in the factory. Yep. So get the castle, check that it's valid. Research panel doesn't call tick on the parent. Not sure if that's a problem or not. Probably should, to be fair. Even though I don't think it's doing anything right now. There we go. Don't think I've done that for the others, so might have to, but first check we have a castle. If we have a castle, we want to get all the blueprints. Now blueprints can be deleted, but we probably aren't going to care too much about that. I don't really understand the benefit of doing that within the game, so this one we really care about. I mean, inevitably, if we just copy all of this, we've pretty much got everything we need anyway. Get rid of those. Don't need the condition actually. Because it never becomes unavailable. That one I don't think we need at all. So we'll need most of that one. Let's get to that in a minute. Luckily, since all these data types are fairly the same, it's just a matter of switching over the variables. Move widget if blueprint no longer exists due to being deleted. Again, don't know if that's ever going to apply, but I've got it there just in case. Blueprint widget. So it needs a name. So I think in this case we actually have more information here. So passing in just the name isn't necessarily all we need. It does save us from getting the table row. So we can take that. So it's going to provide the name. And it's going to provide the sprite. And it will provide the category, and that should be fine. On available blueprint. I think that just takes a name. correct. So we haven't done it as a function, we've done it as a custom event on the graph. The name, the sprite, and the category. Just switch them round. Name, category, and sprite. I think that's everything. We haven't handled the click yet, obviously, but let's see. So you have to research something first. That's done. And it's here. So that's quite cool. Quite good. Now that it's there, we need to be able to click on it. Now this one does something slightly differently because this one's effectively going to open another panel. Is that the way we want to do it? So I'm pause this. When we click on that, we actually go into the details of it, but we're probably still in the research panel. But we go back to it here. Now I could do this as a separate panel, but I could also do it as a widget switcher within the blueprint panel, and I think a widget switcher would just be a little bit nicer because it saves having a separate panel for all of that. So what we actually get, we effectively always get those three columns. Multiple resources would go down under the rock here, so and the bin icon at the bottom probably in line with that one. Okay. So we want a horizontal box first. Make sure we're seeing this new one now. Oops. Don't need them anyway. So got a horizontal box. The first box will be filled with the research image. Then we'll have a vertical box, and then we'll have another image. This image will always be the what I've learnt to be the perfect icon that represents the perfect recipe. Don't know if I've got that sprite, so I just quickly look. Yeah, that one. So that one would be perfect recipe. Not too many. We're also missing the multiplication image. So this one would be our resources. Resource container, call it resource container. And it's a variable. This one is our perfect recipe image. This one is our technology image. So when we select a technology, we switch over to this, and then we populate those with the right thing. So when we select one, we want to so it's the recipe index we need. The recipe index and the blueprint sprite. Just thinking maybe it's better if this because the clickable image only knows the name, and if I change that, then I'm kind of giving it more information. So we'll stick with that. We can over here. For each. So basically just need to find that blueprint again. If we find it, then we can change the perfect recipe image, resource container, technology image, and the widget switcher. I didn't think so. Only downside with having the details all in here is that obviously we've got all the bits and pieces to do in here, but we might be able to refactor it a bit later. So the first thing we need to do is set the brush of our sprite. The last thing we need to do switcher. Set active widget index to 1. Now we'll deal with exiting in a moment. So resource container we have to fill up. Perfect image we have to determine. See what we've got there. Again, what I think I'll do is probably make the sling very quick. On the next iteration, because I'm going to need to do that a lot. So my spike didn't work. Which is odd. Blueprint sprite. So firstly, let's just bring that down to 3. Lab sprite is set. Okay, so I can't see any reason why that wouldn't work. So we're switching to the wrong thing, that's why. That needs to be 0 by default. That's better. Okay, so this isn't within the UI, and the UI doesn't have access to the shortlisted recipes on the castle because they're a map. So we have to get the recipe from the data table itself. Now, if it's perfect, we can set the perfect image. But we don't want to do that. So for the recipe, we have to iterate over its names, which is the resource names. And then we need to get that resource. So it really is just once all that's complete, we need to do the next bit. So we need a new widget component, I think. UI panel component. Gathered resource. Nope, that won't work. Mine resource, again, that won't work. Resource widget. That's just a base one for the two previous ones. Okay, so that, no, we need a new widget. This will be blueprint resource widget. This is fairly straightforward. It's just a vertical box with an image and a number under it. So I think the previous ones have been about 6. Hashes in here. I think we did that in other occasions. So these both need to be variables. But stick. So these values never change, so we can set them on the construction. Actually, we'll have that one as a float then at this for that. Could have bound them in, but do data binding on the widgets themselves, but we, as I say, we don't need to change them. So we want to get the image, make those, set the brush, make a brush, not that one. Not that. That one. So now back over to our blueprint panel. We will create a widget. It's going to be that one. So a blueprint resource widget. We know the sprite and the quantity. Where's the quantity gone? Quantity is here. So we also want to, from that, get find that to there. Yeah, we need to add it to the resource container. be left lying around over here. Add child to vertical box. So we need to make sure that we clear that. So when we click on a technology, we can never have clicked on the same technology twice. That's pretty safe to say, so we'll shift that over. The rest of the things, technology, image, the perfect recipe, all of them going to handle themselves. Maybe that's what the other one should do then. Let's put this back. So just before we find the recipe, we can get that and empty it. Clear children, that's what we wanted. So we just remove all of the children from the resource panel. So we can put them all back again. Okay, so that's not too bad. It's not perfect. It's not perfect recipe and it's not perfect layout, but we're on the right track. So we need to switch over to that one. Not that one, that one. So we'll just put the wok in there. And can add it's not where I wanted that, is it? We can add a couple of these. This gives us an idea of whether it's working correctly. So this one needs to be high and this one needs to be high. Can really just add some padding to push that down. I think that should be fine. We want the resource container to fill, which pushes our perfect icon to the appropriate place. So we should be alright with that, even though it's got some temporary data in it, because we replace it all hopefully with the recipe. Yeah, so we can see that it looks correct now. Probably needs a little bit more spacing. It's not the multiply, it's the equals, and some more spacing, but again I'm not worrying too much about trying to get them perfect yet. I'll go over them once it's a bit more complete. I did move up, so I'm just going to put that to 7. And then finally, for this screen, when we click the header, we need to say get the active widget index. If that equals 0, then we'll do what we've always done and we will exit. Otherwise, we set the active widget index to 0. and that will give us our return. So now we should be able to go into the blueprint and out of it like normal. We'll go and do some research, and then we'll go in and then out again. So that gives us the whole path that we'd expect. So that allows me to see that the recipe that we immediately get for that is that recipe. We can now research the stone and bring in the original game. Now we can see that we're in the same sector. We should therefore have the same resources and recipes. So hopefully we'll end up with the same recipe when we look at the blueprint for it. And that does look to be the case in this case. It's perfect, it's 1.5 stone, that's correct. So that's all good. Now in the game we will research the sling. Takes a little bit longer in the real game. And I can add and remove additional recipes for these things. So what I'll do over time is kind of go through each of the recipes and try and map them better to this version of the game, because I think perhaps the different versions, like the PC version, Amiga version, Atari version, all that, probably had slightly different recipes. I don't know which has the better one, but it's definitely something I'll look into and try and correct. So obviously that produced a different recipe, but neither of them are perfect. I'm not sure what the perfect recipe for the sling is, but neither of them are perfect. Though if you think about it from a resources perspective, it's quite likely that the half a resource of each of these, while it uses the same amount of resources, because the two gathered resources have a cap of the same amount, would actually produce more weapons, more slings, using this recipe than this recipe. So there's definitely a variation there, and I'm not again sure why we get one over another. I'm going to attack already, but luckily we can retaliate with a full set, or defend ourselves and then retaliate with a full complement of 92 slingshot men. So they should, while we may lose our castle, because I think that lag and alert was critical tower, with 87 slings we should take him out and win. But yeah, so that's the kind of key goal that I had for today, is get that blueprint up and running so we can see actually the recipes as they come through. What I need to work on next is actually utilizing the resources to produce some army people, although perhaps that's not the immediate next task. I need to repopulate that with the blueprints now. But now I've got the blueprints, that's kind of the key thing about this one, the blueprints are now available. So I'm able to apply the blueprints to the other screens, and I'll probably try and maybe even get all these other screens up. So there's still quite a lot of kind of boilerplate stuff to do, until I can really start looking at the details of how individual technologies are used. And I also need to do the buildings, which is something that I haven't really looked at yet, although I don't think there's anything new there. But I'm pretty happy with how the research part works, how that blueprint's tied into it. Still quite a bit of cleanup code lying around that I need to sort out. Get rid of these now, actually. So just quite a lot of old code definitely within the castle for the research, so I need to go through all these functions, find out if they're used, where they're used, remove old things. So obviously that's using quite a lot of functions. That in itself is not used, so that tells me which functions to get rid of, and so on and so forth. So lots of cleanup to do, where I don't need things that I've used and I've moved on, and then still plenty to add. But hopefully having the blueprints now, blueprint panel working, it kind of gives me the starting point to do the rest of the screens. So yeah, that's all for today. Should be back again later in the week. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.